Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining this interesting debate we're going to have today on the role of the Energy Efficiency Directive for the energy poverty alleviation. We all know that the energy poverty is one of the phenomena that has increased quite substantially over the last years. If you see the data from all the countries, the indicators addressing the energy poverty are all quite increasing in most of the countries. This is also expected to be much higher due to the energy price increase that we have over the last months, and of course the war in Ukraine. And we strongly believe, from what we've seen in most of the projects, that energy efficiency can be a key important vehicle that can relieve the extra cost for the consumers and for the low-income groups and for the people that cannot afford to pay their bills. In this aspect, we decided to have this workshop, which is a merging of two projects, two Horizon 2020 projects, ENSMOV and SocialWatt, and we will be exploring here what is the role of the obligations set under the Energy Efficiency Directive, the EED, and the recast EED under the new Article 8, and how they can help to relieve energy poverty. So from the first project, it's ENSMOV. The ENSMOV is a project already running in the last year, for its last year now, and it has its main goal is to facilitate and expand the knowledge sharing between the member states and authorities and stakeholders on how to implement the policies under the Article 7. Then the second objective was to have several resources and tools for facilitating the implementation, but it's not only the implementation of the policies, but also of the monitoring and verification scheme. So it's always working in this dual aspect. And the last one is to set up a new MRV scheme, monitoring, reporting and verification schemes, help them member states with the data and insights on how to redesign the policies for in the view of 2030, also with the Fit for 55 package and the new documents, let's say, from the recast EED and the new Article 8 has been so far proposed. The second project, this is, the partnership is from, you can see it's mainly energy agencies and other research partners from all around Europe. You can have the website. And the important here is that since we're speaking about this Article 7, we have generated a hub which is called Article 7 EED.eu, and there you can find information for all the member states related to the Article 7, the status of the implementation, the progress, the types of policies used, and a lot of supporting materials on how to implement policies, set up MRVs, and deal with very technical specificities like taxation, additionality, materiality, and so forth. The next project is a SocialWatt. SocialWatt is also running its last year. It's a project mainly consisting of energy utilities and other research organizations. And the idea here was to enable the utilities, the suppliers, and the ESCOs to test and spread innovative schemes to alleviate energy poverty. So here it's not anymore from the policy aspect, but rather it's from the perspective of the utilities themselves who have to implement these schemes. Then the tool, there is also a set of various tools to help identify. And here you can see also the three tools being generated, the SocialWatt Analyzer, the SocialWatt Plan, and the SocialWatt Check. You can check also the website and have access to the tool. Each tool serves a different purpose for setting up the scheme and the innovative scheme for serving, for using energy efficiency measures from the perspective of the utilities to alleviate energy poverty. This is the agenda for today. I think we'll try to be concise. The first round will be presentations from Sam Thomas from RAP, Jean-Sébastien Brock, my colleague from ICP, Ray Breen for ESB Ireland, and Christos Troukolias from CRES. So once we get a whole snapshot of what's happening in the various countries and how things have worked, get good examples from policies, then we move on to a panel discussion where we'd like to have your active participation. Please do send questions, feel free using the chat, and we will have the five panelists and I'll be moderating where we can go through questions you might be having and discuss specific issues, whether we see that Article 7 EED can work or not for the energy poverty alleviation. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today's event, and I give the floor to my colleague Axel, who will discuss with you briefly the technical parts.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we have a few housekeeping rules for today's event to let you know that the participants will be muted during the speakers' presentations. We will only record the representations by the speakers, and finally you will be able to ask questions and your microphones will be enabled during the Q&A session. So if you want to ask a question at the end, you can raise your hand through the reactions box up there. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Axel. So I'll take over now. So my name's Samuel Thomas. I'm just setting up my my PowerPoint. Do you see the main? Just trying to. Do you see the main screen, or do you see the notes?
Yep, we see it full screen. That's perfect.
Perfect. Excellent. So yeah, I'm Samuel Thomas from the Regulatory Assistance Project, where I lead the efficiency team in their Europe division. And well, we're really pleased to be involved in both of these Horizon projects, both the ENSMOV and the SocialWatt project, because they both really contribute to our mission as an organisation. We're a non-partisan NGO dedicated to accelerating the energy transition. And both of these projects have this combined knowledge and experience sharing vision, and the overlap between them really is on the energy savings obligation of the Energy Efficiency Directive and the energy efficiency obligations that flow from those that utilities have. So in this presentation, I'm just going to briefly give an overview of the current energy savings obligation that's in the 2018 directive and what that implies for member states and how member states have implemented that through their energy efficiency obligations. Then I'm going to focus on the proposals that the Commission launched last year and that are currently being negotiated in the Council and the Parliament, and should hopefully wrap up towards the end of this year, maybe early next year, and what that might mean going forward. So first of all, Article 7 Energy Efficiency Directive, the 2018, the current directive, and energy poverty. So the first thing to do is, just for those that aren't aware, Article 7 EED means that member states shall, so it's a must, achieve a quantitative target, and that target, we won't go into the specifics now, but it's set in terms of end-use energy savings. And this target that the member states must achieve, they have to achieve that through national energy efficiency policy measures. So the things that they do to meet this target for energy savings, they have to be their own policies that are delivering them, and those policy measures have to be energy efficiency policy measures. So this is quite a strong article within the Energy Efficiency Directive, and it necessarily leads to lots of policy measures being put in place by member states. Now, the energy poverty aspects of the current directive in this article are relatively weaker. So they currently say, in designing policy measures to fulfill their obligations to achieve energy savings, member states shall take into account the need to alleviate energy poverty. So that taking into account, it's relatively weak, but some member states do take it into account in their policy design, and we're going to look at how they do that in the next few slides. So first of all, why are utilities so important in this aspect? Well, if we look at how member states are delivering on their energy savings obligations, we can see that 35% of the savings come through energy efficiency obligation schemes. And that's not surprising. The directive is set up in a way that basically suggests to member states that they should consider putting in place an energy efficiency obligation scheme to meet their own energy savings obligation. But they're also able to put in place alternative measures, and the rest of this pie chart shows the types of measures that member states have put in place. Financing schemes there in yellow, and fiscal incentives are particularly important, I would suggest, with respect to policy alternative measures that could be designed in a way to target energy poverty alleviation. But we're going to focus in the next few slides on the energy efficiency obligation schemes, because that's where the overlap between SocialWatt and ENSMOV exists. So what have we learned from the projects? Well, we did a gap analysis and it showed that of the 16 energy efficiency obligations, we use the term EEO for short, only 7 of those make provision for energy poverty alleviation. 3 have a ring fence, so a proportion of the savings, so a proportion of the utilities obligations have to be delivered in low-income households. That's in 3 cases. And in 5, we see administrative uplifts to the value of the savings made in low-income households to promote delivery. So here, if you make a saving in a low-income household or energy poor household, then that's worth more to you as a utility in meeting your obligation. Although when you actually report that to the Commission in terms of reporting on your energy savings obligation, you'd have to remove that uplift because it's purely administrative for the purpose of persuading utilities to invest more in energy efficiency in energy poor households. Now you'll notice that 3 plus 5 doesn't equal 7. That's because we have one country where both uplifts and a ring fence have been used. So let's have a quick look at the countries. So first of all, let's start with the uplifts. We see that this has been in place in Austria, Croatia, Cyprus, Greece and France. And we see different values ranging from 1.1, 1.2 in Croatia. You can add those together if you are an endangered customer. So that's the kind of energy poor proxy, and you're in an area with developmental difficulties. So there are 2 different uplifts there. We also see them in Greece, Cyprus, Austria. France has the highest one, 2. Well, it had, I should use the past tense because a new scheme is now in place, or a new phase is now in place in 2022. In France, there was an uplift of 2 for very low income households. And just interestingly, they also, because it's a white certificate scheme in France, so the compliance that obligated parties have to achieve can be traded on an open market. The compliance is translated into white certificates, so those represent energy savings. And if you are an organization that's helping obligated parties to reach those on very low incomes or other targeted groups, then you can be given white certificates at a fixed rate for doing that. So essentially these are kind of paper white certificates that have a value that would allow an organization that was working alongside utilities to benefit from the investments they're making in targeting those very low income households. So that's an interesting innovation in France. The other approach is the ring fence, and in France there is a ring fence of 25% of obligations, and in the period 2016 to 2021, when we had this uplift for very low income households, there was a ring fence of 25% for low income households. In the new phase, very low income households are now the group that have their sub-target, this ring fence. So now 25% of the French obligation must be delivered in this very low income households group, which is a much stronger proxy for those households in energy poverty. In Ireland, there's a 5% ring fence for households receiving various types of welfare payments, all located in development areas. And in the UK, this has evolved over many years. Now we have 100% ring fence. So basically all of the obligation has to be targeted in energy poor households. And of that obligation, 15% must be in rural areas. So that's an overview of the different approaches amongst member states. What do we see in terms of the impact? Well, the main lesson that we've learned is that the uplifts have very little impact. So it's actually quite difficult to get a quantitative hold on this, but we understand from Austria, for example, that only 0.36% of obligated parties' obligations has been delivered amongst households affected by energy poverty, despite the 1.5 uplift factor. Whereas if you have a ring fence, it has to be delivered, otherwise there are penalties that obligated parties face. So I think the main lesson in terms of this aspect of policy design is that if you want to make sure that you do get energy efficiency measures delivered amongst energy poor households, then a ring fence seems to be essential. So, looking ahead, there are proposed changes to the Energy Efficiency Directive. So this is a slide that the Commission have presented in the past, and there are some broader changes to the directive, such as binding EU energy efficiency target, making the energy efficiency first principle an integral part of policy and investment decisions. But when we get to the bottom half of this slide, we see the changes that are being proposed that are directly relevant to the energy savings obligation. So number one, it's being strengthened. There's also actually another aspect that overlaps with the energy savings obligation, in that the public sector is being given a stronger exemplary role. And then crucially at the bottom here, there's an increased focus on alleviating energy poverty and consumer empowerment. So how does that actually translate into the proposals that we see for Article 7 EED, or as it will now be Article 8? Well, from 2024, we would see that the overall annual target would be almost doubled, so from 0.8 to 1.5% of new annual energy savings each year. Savings from direct fossil fuel combustion would be excluded, so thinking about the energy poor segment, so you'd no longer be able to subsidise a boiler replacement, but still fabric improvements and also fuel switching to heat pumps, for example, would be included. There are some issues around the treatment of tax measures, but the crucial thing here at the bottom of our slide is that each member state would have to achieve a minimum share of their required energy savings among people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable customers, and where applicable, people living in social housing. So essentially, the Commission have seen what's happened in the previous period, 2014 to 2020, and they essentially agree that a ring fence is needed to ensure that the energy savings obligation fulfills part of its role, which is to alleviate energy poverty. How is the minimum share calculated? Well, the share of energy savings is to be at least equal to the share of the population identified as in energy poverty in member states' national energy and climate plans, so NECPs. And if that's not quantified in the NECPs, then the share is then calculated as the average of three indicators, which are around the inability to keep the home warm, arrears on utility bills, and energy expenditure as a share in total expenditure. And what is the outcome of that averaging if you don't have your share in your NECP identified? Well, you have ring fences ranging from as low as 2.6% in Sweden to as high as 23% in Bulgaria. So just to conclude, so our lessons from the ENSMOV and SocialWatt project: ring fences, sub-targets ensure delivery. Uplifts, at least so far, have had limited impact. Of course, a very high uplift, the likes of which we haven't seen so far, would potentially have more of an impact. Partnerships are key. I haven't really focused that on the quantitative analysis I've just shown, but except where I highlighted the approach in France. What we've seen in other countries too is that to reach the households that you want to target, you need to work with other organisations as a utility. So local authorities, NGOs, social housing providers, for example, in delivering schemes. And then thinking about it more at the national policy level, effective support often combines different measures working together. So you might need policy measures that ensure that those local authorities, those NGOs, those social housing providers, the retailers, the technology providers, there are policy measures that can be put in place, whether it's giving white certificates for doing these things, or for ensuring that finance flows through to those groups to help achieve your objectives. If you can combine those things, then your policy outcomes can be met more effectively. And designing finance schemes suitable for energy poor households, it is challenging. Combining these national and local funding with utility support can work for what are essentially higher cost measures, given that low-income households cannot afford to make their own contributions to the investment costs of energy efficiency measures. So I'm going to leave it there and pass on to Jean-Sébastien, who's going to look in greater detail at some policy measures. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Let me share my screen now. So, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you this morning and to share some insight from a study that was done for the French National Observatory on Energy Poverty, ONPE and ADEME. And I will focus on a part that will be complementary to what Sam just presented, looking a bit more at alternative measures, as Sam just focused a bit more on energy efficiency obligation scheme. But also this study that was done for ONPE and ADEME was not specifically focused on, just to explain the context, it was not focused on the Article 7, on the scope of Article 7 EED. It was about policy to tackle energy poverty in general, focusing on 10 countries. So very briefly, what was the objective of these studies? That was to gather up-to-date data, but I will explain that it was done in 2020. Mostly the data collection and a bit in 2021. So I won't be able to provide insights about latest developments and especially about measures that have been taken by the member states since the end of 2021 and early 2022 to face the current energy crisis. And the objective of the gathering this data was to develop synthesis per country, to disseminate information and to facilitate experience sharing overall. And you can find on the ONPE website, I will put afterwards the link in the chat, the 10 country fact sheets that were produced. They are available both in French and in English. So don't worry when you go to this page, the text on the top is in French. But then when you go to the bottom, you will see a map of Europe with the countries. And if you click on the country you are interested in, you will find the fact sheet in English. And there was also a paper presented at ECEEE last year. So that's just an overview to show how each fact sheet is looking. You have here the example of France, so it's 4 pages. The first page is about background and governance. The second one provides a few figures about statistics and indicators. The third one, and that's the one I will focus on today, summarize the main information about the main policies to tackle energy poverty in the country. And the last page provides the selections of good practices, mostly from local initiatives, or in the case of France, also some programs that were part of the French White Certificate Scheme, as Sam mentioned earlier, that there is this special possibility in the French scheme to have a program focusing on tackling energy poverty. You have here the 10 countries that were covered in the study. Overall, we have identified 29 policy measures that were to address energy access, so mostly providing support with energy bills or preventing disconnection. 26 policy measures that deals with energy efficiency as a way to tackle energy poverty, and we will see different what we mean here and the different approaches identified, and overall more than 70 good practices or other initiatives that provides, let's say, some diversity in the way you can tackle energy poverty. Very quickly, I won't read all of that, but just to say that, as I mentioned earlier, the data collection was mostly completed by the end of 2020. So it might look a bit outdated already, but I think it's also useful to have a kind of state of play of how it was before the current crisis we are facing now, and also because it gives some insights why there are more of the emergency measures that are of some types and not of others. I will clarify that in a minute. Very quick insights about the context and governance. What we see different approaches according to each country, which is in a sense normal because energy poverty is quite a complex issue with different dimensions, so it does not develop in the same way in each country. But that's also linked to the, let's say, the policy background and other aspects. So we categorize the countries mostly in 3 groups. The first one, they address energy poverty as a general poverty issue, so there is no real specific policies to tackle energy poverty there. The second group, that's what we call an intermediate approach. So the issue is officially recognized, not always officially defined, but at least officially recognized. And there are some measures on the side of energy access to tackle energy poverty, but there is no energy efficiency measure that would be fully dedicated to tackle energy poverty. And then what we call comprehensive approach, that's the same as the intermediate, but you can find there some dedicated energy efficiency measures to tackle energy poverty. And what is clear is that there are measures to help with energy access in all countries, while you don't find energy efficiency measures with some link to tackling energy poverty in all countries. So that there is here a kind of imbalance in the approaches used by member states to address that. I won't go in details about the definition, but just to mention that there are developments and more countries adopt or at least have a practical definition, even if not completely official, of energy poverty. And most probably with the update of the NACP, we might see also more countries with either an official definition or at least some kind of indicator to assess energy poverty in the country. So now to the topic of today, the national policy measures. That's this table is just to provide an overview and to give you an incentive to look at the brochure and maybe the country you are more interested in. And we group the policy measures in 3 types. Here the first level, in a sense, is to consider that the measures does not have any specific social criteria, so not in the eligibility criteria, nor in the way to define the incentive rate, for example. However, this measure is deemed affordable to all households. So that's, let's say, a first level to make sure that every household can take part in the program. The second one is to use social criteria. So in that case, that's mostly to differentiate the grant rates according to either income level or some kind of social benefits or other social criteria. And the third level is to have a measure that is really dedicated to energy poverty. So that's supposed to be available only for households that are at risk of energy poverty, which is most often addressing through criteria like income level or social criteria. Another some other let's say interesting point we noticed in this review is that most of the national measures are focused on buildings in the sense of heating or improving the building envelope. That there were much less national measures dealing with specific electricity end use and in particular electrical appliances. While in some countries that might also represent a large share of their energy expenses, depending on the climate and the differences in the different prices of energy. The second point is, let's say, the complement. Most of the schemes that are offering low-cost actions, which are like tailored energy advice, LED, multi-sockets with a switch, etc., are rather implemented through local initiatives. And that's a complement of what I've just said, that national measures tend to focus on interventions that have higher cost, like building renovation. And yeah, we can then come back to the issue of targeting. That was true when we did the study about the recovery plans, and I think that's even more striking now when we see the measures that are taken to face the current energy crisis. To almost conclude with that, very quickly, three examples of measures that we found interesting. One, maybe I will start with Poland and UK and develop a bit more about Belgium. That is actually Wallonia. So in Poland, there is a program to which might not be in the future completely eligible to Article 7 according to whether new provisions are included about fossil fuel technologies, but the objective there was to combine an objective of tackling energy poverty with the objective of improving air quality. So definitely focusing on coal heating system and more specifically individual houses, as the apartment blocks are managed through other programs. In UK, there is already what is in discussion in the EPBD in terms of minimum energy performance standards or minimum energy efficiency standards, as it's called in the UK, with an obligation of renovation works in the private renting sector. And here it's already implemented with, and that's implemented in a way that the requirement is a minimum amount of investment to be done by the landlords. Then there can be discussion if it's enough or not. And the last example is Belgium, and we found it particularly interesting because that's a combination of schemes that consider, let's say, different level of difficulties encountered by the households or different levels of financial capabilities. So the first one would be for households that still have the possibility to contribute to renovation works, but who will not have access to credit in the private banking system. The second scheme is to provide a grant up to a certain level. So in that case, a bit more than 1,300 euros for low-income households for so-called intermediate works. So that's not low-cost actions, but that's not either deep renovation, that's in between. And then there is a scheme focusing on the most vulnerable households, where here it's let's say one-to-one support, acknowledging that these households require more assistance. This table is just to show that there are plenty of good practices in the brochure and in the different fact sheets. And with this table, if you are interested in a particular type of operation, then you can check the corresponding countries where we have found some initiatives. This review is not exhaustive at all. The objective was actually to select initiatives that were complementary in terms of diversity and also giving the priority to initiatives that can be transferred or replicable, or that were already upscaled to some extent. But that's not today's topic. As a conclusion about observation and knowledge on energy poverty, maybe here I would just mention that we really saw the added value of national observatories, especially to centralize information and to stimulate experience sharing on national level, and hopefully in the future also between countries. But we only saw that one observatory has a regular review or monitoring or publication on data about the policy measures and their results. So most other observatories are focused on monitoring the trends and indicators about energy poverty, but not about the policy measures and their results. So I think that's something that should be encouraged, and that should be the next stage in developing the observation and knowledge in this field. And about the policy measures, here maybe the messages is that, and we can see that in the current measures that are taken by the member states to face the increase in energy prices. Most of the measures are first taken to provide a direct aid with energy expenses, which can be probably the only way to reach all households on short term, but that does not solve at all the problem. So the higher the energy prices, the higher the budget that member state needs to allocate to that, and that's not sustainable over time. In the meantime, there is a clear need to support the vulnerable households to do renovation works, because we can see that if the program is not dedicated to them, in most cases, they cannot really take part, because that's they cannot contribute to the minimum level that is asked to them. And another key message is the idea to have a comprehensive support and to address the complexity of energy poverty. So that's why we mentioned the example from Wallonia, because that's the energy issue is usually not due to one particular problem or related to one particular target group. So you need to address this diversity or complexity with probably a set of measures that complement each other to avoid any blind spot in the strategy. And as time is running, I suggest I will stop here, and I'll be happy to come back to the slide if you need. And I think next is
Thank you very much, Jean-Sebastian. And thank you, Sam, for the two first interventions. So we got the first snapshot of the policies and also for the short-term measures, what things work, what not, and some good practices. And now we move on to the second batch, which is with Ray Breen from ESB Ireland on best practices from the Irish schemes, which have been a kind of front runners in tackling the energy poverty through the EOs. And then from Christos Tourgolias from CRES on how the Greek EO scheme takes into account and tries to tackle through the factors the energy poverty. So Ray, the floor is yours, and then Christos.
Perfect. Everybody can see the screen there?
Yes.
Yes,
yep,
yes.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So my name is Ray Breen. I am the obligation scheme manager in Electric Ireland, which is the supply arm of ESB in Ireland. So I am responsible for delivering the energy obligation scheme targets that have been set by the SEAI, which is the governing body in Ireland, for both residential, fuel poor and commercial. So obviously I'm going to concentrate today on the fuel poor. So I won't go through. I think everybody knows what the obligation schemes, where they came from, and how they're set up. But basically in Ireland from 2014 to 2020, we had an obligation scheme, and it was based on annual energy savings target of 1.5%. So basically what the state did was they took the 1.5% saving and then divided that amongst obligated parties based on your market share of final annual energy sales to customers by volume. and that was originally in primary energy, but in the new scheme it has since changed to final energy. So just to give some examples of fuel poor projects that we would have done in the past. So as was stated earlier, in Ireland, 5% of the obligation scheme is ring fenced for fuel poor. Sorry, I've just realized my camera is on. I'm off. I'm just going to turn it on there. Sorry. So 5% of the obligation scheme is ring fenced for fuel poor customers. So there's a number of projects that we would have done in the past. Some more, what would you say, low end or entry level, and some a bit more fulfilling. So to give you an example, Climode installation in local authority homes. Climode is an Irish-made smart heating control. So this was deemed to be an energy-saving measure. So there was a number of ways that we had put these into homes. So there's so many energy credits associated with the installation of it that we were able to then finance or part pay for the installation, and Climode themselves would go out and have these relationships with local authorities and install them, including the discount, and often they were able to do this for free to the local authorities, and ended up putting tens of thousands of these into local authority homes. So that's one example of lower end kind of technologies that we put into homes. We also would have done supporting works with local authorities and housing associations. The Ivy Trust is one of the oldest ones in Ireland, which is actually owned and operated still by the Guinness family of Guinness fame. They do an awful lot for the poor of Dublin originally, but then extended it across the country. So with the likes of the Ivy Trust, what we would do for them is they would give us the energy credits associated with the upgrade works carried out on homes, housing within their social housing stock. And in return for that, we would offer either financial supports. So we would basically give, 10 cents per credit and just give them a cash value for it, and they can use that money to then support their projects. Or in some cases, what we have done is we have offered them services in lieu of cash. So with a lot of local authorities and housing support or housing agencies like the Ivy Trust, they get funding to do this, so they're not particularly interested in money a lot of the time. I mean, if we were to give them money, be very difficult for them to even take the money in as a local authority. So what they often look for is services in lieu of that money. So in some situations, what we would have done was offered some professional services in exchange for those energy credits. So we would have done things like home assessments, pre-BER assessments, and doing energy ratings of pre and post works, doing an audit of the works, post works, to make sure they meet the standards and so on. So there was different ways that we would have supported those works. And like I said, for Cork City Council and Dublin County City Council would have been two of the bigger cities in Ireland. We we would have done that with them as well. And other things we would have done was like tendering assistance. So a lot of times the local authorities, they're not experts in this, they're not experts in energy efficiency. So we would supply them with somebody that would assist them in putting together the tenders that they're going out and looking for partners to deliver the actual physical works on the homes. So often we would assist with that. So that's an example of some of the works we have done in the past and how we have generated energy credits for ourselves. And now there's also what's called better energy community schemes that we would work on. So in Ireland, through the SEAI, you can apply for funding for what's called a better energy community scheme. And the idea of these schemes was to have a bit of everything. So the scheme must include a certain portion of residential, a certain portion of potentially fuel poor, and a certain portion of commercial works. And what would normally happen is in a local community, you would have an installation company would come along and work with 2 or 3 partners, including an obligated party like ourselves, potentially working with local authority, and come up with a plan of upgrading commercial and residential properties in a particular geographical area, and they would look for funding for that, and we would assist in that as well. We would sign up to purchase the energy credits from those, and once they got the funding, we then support those and give them either the cash in lieu of the credits, or as I've stated here, the different types of technical assistance that we may have given for those. So there's a number of different ways, especially with the local authorities, with the councils, that we would work with them. Just at the moment, there's probably 2 main sources of funding that come to local authorities in Ireland. The first is through the Department of the Environment. So they're given money every year to do X number, based on their housing stock, X number of homes to be upgraded. But they also get financing from the Department of Housing separately, to bring the housing stock up to grade as well. So they're the 2 main kind of funding models for the local authorities at present, and that's where we would be getting from this year onwards. We will be getting pretty much 100% of all of our fuel per energy savings from those type of projects. So looking for 2021 to 2030. So as I said, the 2014 to 2020 scheme was very successful. We just to give ourselves a pat on the back, in Electric Ireland, we exceeded our targets to, I think it was 112% of our targets across all 3 sectors. So we did extremely well on it, and an awful lot of that was to do with a lot of the upfront work that we did. So in the early days of the program, we hit the ground running, built up a lot of good relationships with the local authorities, and we were able to make hay on those. So from going forward, 2020 to 2030, so the new scheme, the new obligation scheme has changed. It's changed dramatically. There's no other word for it. Has changed dramatically compared to what we had before. The biggest change is this move away from deemed credits to a home-based, BER-based measures. So whereas before the SEAI that managed the scheme on behalf of the government, you go onto their website, they have a list of 50 or 60. They have a list of 50 or 60 measures that you can do in a home, and you get X number of credits or X number of kilowatt hour savings for doing each of those. They've decided that that's no longer going to work. They want to move away from individual measures, and what they have brought forward now is a new scheme whereby you do a pre-assessment on the home and a post-assessment on the home, and the actual savings, regardless of what measures are done, that is what you can claim for. Now, there's a few caveats with that dramatically changes things. Number one is that it must be B2 or better. So that means that for the vast majority of houses, it's a large amount of work being done. So the idea of back in the old scheme of somebody just maybe getting a new heating control and attic insulation to start, that wouldn't qualify any longer. It must have an uplift of 100 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, and it must also reach B2 or better level. So realistically, for the majority of homes, you're looking at doing full external insulation, internal insulation, roof insulation, new heating control or new heating system, potentially a heat pump as well, and potentially solar. So for a lot of homes, it just really means that we're moving away from. On the old scheme, we would have done tens of thousands of Climotes and Nests and all of those kind of heating controls. Now we're just looking at doing a couple of hundred of big jobs on homes. So there's a big push now to promote this one-stop shop model. So the one-stop shop model is where you would actually go to a professional service, which is called a one-stop shop, and you pay them a premium, and they basically do everything for you. They do all the pre and post assessments, they find the contractors, they complete the works, and by doing it with them, the SEAI offer grants of up to 55% for using the one-stop shop. So they're really pushing people away from doing the kind of individual energy upgrades. There's still grants available for those, but to qualify for fuel or to qualify for energy credits, and especially in the fuel poor sector, you would have to be going through one of these one-stop shops. So the as I said here, the one of the big changes then is that these individual upgrades don't qualify any longer. It also means that the sources of energy credits is greatly diminished now. That's kind of balanced out with the fact that because there are larger jobs being done and larger retrofits, there's less, what would you say, there's less individual homes being serviced, but the value of those homes is greatly increased because of the level of works that are being done. One of the big changes here that has been a bone of contention, especially when it comes to fuel poor, is the fact that a lot of existing homes that have had previous works completed may not qualify. So what they have done is, for fuel poor homes, they want to target all of the F&G rated homes, similar to what they've done in the UK, that any kind of F&G rated homes are the ones that they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck upgrading. So we have situations where we would have worked with local authorities 6-7 years ago, where they went in and put in a new heating control and attic insulation and potentially some form of draft proofing internal insulation for a home, and maybe brought it from an F or a G up to a D, for example, or up to a D3. Now the problem is that they no longer qualify. So, sorry, if they brought them up to a C, for example, that home can no longer qualify, or that local authority cannot come back and get energy credits to bring that home up to a B or an A, because it must have a rating of D3 or lower. So it must be an E, an F, or a G rating. So we do have a situation where we feel, and we push this with the authority, Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, but they haven't moved on it. So we're waiting to see over the first 2 years of the scheme what impact this has. But we believe that there's an awful lot of homes out there in fuel poverty that are possibly heat pump ready and could move towards a full electric home, a high energy efficient home, but they just can't qualify for this scheme. So we ourselves have set up a one-stop shop called Electric Ireland Super Homes through a joint venture with an agency called a Tipperary Energy Agency, and we plan on through that, within the next year or two, delivering 100% of all of our energy obligation scheme targets in residential and fuel poor through this super homes. And like I said, the new scheme has been designed in such a way that the SEAI and the government have really pushed companies like ourselves and other obligated parties to set up these one-stop shops to promote the retrofitting of homes in general, but also to service the fuel poor area as well. We will also continue then to do, as I was mentioning, those BEC schemes and so on, and the schemes that the local authorities would get funding from the Department of the Environment and Department of Housing. We'll continue to work with those separately to deliver, but a lot of those would be coming in through super homes anyway, because super homes would be the ones going out and vying for that business, so we just capture them through that scheme. So like I said, just some of the key changes for 2022 onwards, and just some comments, I suppose, is, you know, at the moment with the energy crisis, there's a big concentration on assisting with bills. There's people's heads have been turned to just assisting people now and helping them with the high rising costs of energy right now, rather than the long term or solutions. You know, so for example, we ourselves would have a program where we have put a couple of million euro into a pot to assist people that are struggling with their bills at the moment. So a lot of companies are doing that because there's a real urgency right now. People are struggling now. The long-term, long-scale, you know, plans are kind of, as always happens in emergency situations, they kind of come to a bit of a halt. So there is a danger that, you know, we concentrate too much on assisting with you know, monetary savings right now. New obligated parties coming into the mix is a big thing in Ireland, and I don't know if this is the same across what's happening across Europe, but in Ireland we have just in the new scheme brought in transport and oil companies. So what that means is a lot of the petrol forecourts owners are now obligated parties, and they're going to be taking on a large portion of the obligation. And how they deliver those targets, we're not 100% sure yet, and we're not 100% sure of the effect that they will have of coming into the market. One thing that they could do is they don't have the ability, they don't have the setup, they don't have the customer base, the likes of ourselves and our competitors would, where we can tap into actual homeowners to you know, generate energy efficiencies. So these guys, like the kind of Circle K's of the world, they could be coming in and just throwing money at this to meet their obligations, and by doing that, really push up the value of an energy credit, and by doing that, make it extremely expensive to operate for everybody in the market. And what will happen from that, the downside of that is that what you will end up doing is, where I was saying on the previous scheme, we exceeded our fuel poor targets by, I think, 120%, and we were happy to do that. We feel we have a moral obligation to do that. If it gets to the point where those energy credits are so expensive, we'll be under financial pressure to just do the bare minimum. So there is a danger there. The new fuel poor funding models, I think, is going to have a big impact as well. Like I said, there's a lot more money coming from the state due to our climate action plan to alleviate fuel poverty. And what that means is, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the money is now going into deep retrofits rather than shallow measures. And then the BER minimums for fuel poor, I've already mentioned that, and the problems associated with that, where some people may not be able to get like a second round of upgrades done to their home. So look, all in all, I think that's the end of my presentation. But just kind of closing comment. All in all, we believe that the model that we have worked with in the past number of years has been extremely successful. We believe that we're going to be successful in the new scheme in how we believe they're going to be delivered. But the one thing I would point out is, and this had been a bone of contention in the when the consultation came out for this, we had replied through a number of different means ourselves, through a couple of agencies as well. There's a massive gap in the market here, and it goes back to what is deemed fuel poor. So in Ireland, to qualify as a fuel poor, if to qualify as fuel poor, you must meet one of the criteria, and they're all linked to pretty much social welfare payments. So if you are living alone allowance, if you're on a lone parent allowance, if you get a fuel allowance, so it's all of these allowances that are associated with social welfare. And if you qualify for those and you own your home, you're living it, and it's built before 1993, I think it is now, you can qualify for these free upgrades. Okay, so the local authority will come and do the upgrade on your home free of charge. Then on the other side, you have people that are comfortable. They have, the savings, they have access to finance, and they see the long-term, 15, 20-year savings that they could affect by doing these upgrades, and they will pay. They're the can pay, and they will pay. But then you have this core in the middle that are technically under under the definition. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Under the definition of fuel poor being that you're spending 10% or more of your disposable income on fuel, there's a lot of people fall into that, but they don't necessarily qualify for the local authority schemes. So you could have, you know, 2 people working low-end jobs, a number of children, paying their mortgage, paying their taxes, not on social welfare and in fuel poverty, but they have no way to qualify for any of these schemes. So there's a large portion of fuel poor customers, we believe, in Ireland are missing out here. We also believe that by the way the scheme has been set up, and this is a danger across Europe, I believe I read a paper recently that they use the word ghettoization, which I think is a great word to use. You're creating fuel poor ghettos, whereas before ghettos would have been associated with, like, you know, geographical areas. What you now have are ghetto homes across all areas due to their energy efficiency. So, for example, if you imagine right now, there is no mechanism, there is no incentive for landlords to upgrade homes in Ireland. Okay, so not unlike the UK, where they've said that they must spend an X amount on upgrading the home. There's no mechanism in Ireland at the moment for this. So what that means is that people, if they want cheap rent, they have to rent inefficient homes like ENF homes. And the only way for the landlord in these areas to increase the rent is to do major renovations on the home. But if they do major renovations on the home, they're most likely going to increase the rent to a point where that person can no longer afford it, and they have to go looking for another E or F or G rated home, most likely. So you're going to end up with this situation where people get pushed more and more into fuel poverty and all of the health aspects and everything else that come along with that. So anyway, that just a couple of closing comments on some personal thoughts on how fuel poverty is measured in Ireland. So that's me.
Thanks a lot, Ray. It has been very dense and a lot of info now. But we must admit that Ireland is always a model country in terms of the energy poverty and how you have dealt with the EOs there. It's a longer experience. Also, it's important that you stressed the difficult points in implementation of the scheme and the evolution of it, because that's quite an indeed, and it's going to be new challenges coming up. And nowadays, as you rightly said, with the energy price spikes, that we all check on the short-term measures, we tend to forget all this overall strategy, and it's left for, I suppose it's left behind. So we move on to the other scheme in Greece, which is another country with a serious issue in the energy poverty now. And the EEO seems to be one of the instruments that will be tackling, at least to the greatest extent, the poverty as much as possible, of course, in the evolution. Thank you. And Christos from CRES, who is also a partner in the ENSMOV project. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Vlasis. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy that presenting our experience on how to combat energy poverty through energy efficiency obligation schemes. Of course, we are not so mature country such as Ireland, but we're trying to have very careful first step in order to find out the most effective ways so as to involve energy efficiency obligation schemes in our attempt to combat energy poverty. In regards to energy poverty in Greece, we start thinking of how it is feasible to alleviate this phenomenon since 2015, where when we harmonized our national legislation with EED, and we in 2015, and we described the need to compile a national action plan for the alleviation of energy poverty. So we started discussion about the national indicator, about the appropriate measures, and finally, in the draft and in the final NCP, we decided to specify the national target. In this action plan, in this NCP, we set as a national target our intention to reduce by 50% energy poverty in 2025 compared to 2016, and to reduce by 75% 2030 compared to 2016. After the submission of the NCP, we started the compilation of the National Action Plan, which was finalized and was adopted in September of 2021, where we defined the indicator for the identification of the energy poor households and the measures which will be applied, will be implemented until 2030 in order to fulfill the target which was specified in the NECP. As I mentioned, we decided in 2015 to combat this phenomenon because we noticed a deterioration of this phenomenon since 2010-11 due to the economic recession in Greece. We had a combination of measures in order to combat fuel poverty, not for all these measures, as you can see in this slide, we refer to low-income household, and we managed up to 2018 to somehow improve to diminish the effect of this phenomenon. But as you can see, in 2020, we realized an additional increase, which will be, of course, higher in 2021. In this diagram, we can see the four indicators which are used in the European Observatory of Energy Poverty. In our National Action Plan for the Alleviation of Energy Poverty, as I mentioned, we specified the national definition for this, and energy poor households, according to this indicator, which is a composite indicator, is characterized as energy poor if satisfies simultaneously two conditions. If the total energy consumption of the household is lower than the 80% of the minimum energy consumption which is required theoretically, and simultaneously if the total normalized income of the household based on the number of the household person is lower than the 60% of the mean income, which is similar to the national definition of the poverty in Greece. So as you can see with the orange line, our indicators is very close to the, let's say, to the subjective indicators of the European Observatory of Poverty, and it has almost the same tendency with other two objectives. And for 2020, as you can see, yes, we have noticed an increase, and the gap with the indicator about the inability to keep home adequate home is closer. It's about 12 compared to 16. So we believe that this indicator provide a better and more realistic overview, depiction of the energy poverty in Greece. And with taking into consideration this indicator, and according to the specified target in the NECP, we have to decrease the energy poverty from 14% in 2016 to 7% to 2025 and to 3% 2020. And according to this target, approximately 420,000 households must be supported by the policy measures, which are described in the National Action Plan. In regards to these measures, we determined three different pillars of them. One, the regulatory one, in order to protect the households and aiming to the short-term alleviation of energy poverty. The second pillar refers to mainly to the measures which will contribute to combat energy poverty through improving energy efficiency and through the further deployment of RES. And of course, we have an awareness and information measures in order to facilitate the confrontation of this problem. And more, we have a monitoring mechanism in order to quantify the impacts of these measures. In this slide, you can see the nine policy measures which have been integrated into three pillars, and I have highlighted two of them which foresee the involvement of the energy efficiency obligation schemes, both in the second pillar, in order to provide incentives to the energy households in order to implement energy efficiency measures. And of course, we believe that energy efficiency obligation schemes can have a crucial role in improving the awareness and information of the energy poor households. And specifically for these two policy measures, there is a description about the main, let's say, objectives of these within the action plan. And as you can see, for measure ME6, the action plan foresees the promotion of low-cost energy efficiency measures through the utilization of increase factor, then uplift factor that describes some, while the role and the combination and the implementation of this can be implemented in conjunction with the demand response programs, which will be initiated in the next years in Greece. And moreover, there is a provision about the design and initiation of a support scheme for fostering the energy efficiency intervention, similar to Ireland, to provide a subsidy to the energy poor households and to reduce, let's say, the financial burden of the obligated parties, so as to make more attractive the implementation of this intervention to energy poor households. For the case of measures M8, which foresee the conduction of awareness raising measures, we tend to organize, to apply a more targeted measures, advices for the rational use of energy. We foresee, as you can see, a respective increase factor to this, and we tend the obligated party to conduct simplified energy audit in order to identify the most cost-effective energy efficiency intervention in energy poor households. We decided to involve energy efficiency obligation scheme because it's a new scheme in Greece, which was started in 2017 and contributed significantly to, in our attempt to fulfill the national target within the framework of Article 7. One characteristic of this scheme was the participation of supplier of electricity, natural gas and petroleum product suppliers. The problem that now have in Ireland of how it will be more effective to involve the petroleum product supplier to these schemes. And the reason that we decided to initiate, to design, to implement, to apply this scheme is, of course, to confront the adverse impacts of the energy recession, to avoid the high increase of fuel prices, to involve, to engage in this scheme the supplier of petroleum product, and to change, let's say, the entrepreneurial orientation from selling products to the energy efficiency. We tackle various challenges regarding how it will be feasible to comply with this technical requirement, to handle the high contribution of behavioral measures, etc. And as you can see from the diagram, the obligated party undertook a target equal to 333 kilowatt of energy savings, and finally they managed to deliver approximately 600, so they surpassed their target, and the total contribution of EO schemes in the national performance was approximately 25%, as we will be reported in the end of April. This is the contribution of each energy efficiency measures to fulfilling the target within the energy efficiency obligation scheme. As you can see, almost half were resulted by a awareness raises campaign in residential, tertiary, and transport sector. But the first steps in order to implement energy efficiency measures in transport sector and utility sector were occurred by the obligated parties, and now we had the challenge, as you can see in the next slide, how we will go to the next step this scheme. In regards to the aim of this workshop is if the involvement of the obligated managers to help us to alleviate energy poverty in Greece. As I said in the previous scheme, in the period 2017-2020, there was a provision to increase the delivered energy saving by a factor 1.4 in the case that the energy efficiency measures were implemented in energy poor household, this uplift factor. And finally, only, let's say, approximately 8 kiloton of the delivered energy savings were resulted by these interventions, and mainly were derived by awareness-raising measures and the promotion of energy efficiency labs in energy poor households. So let's say the contribution, yes, the attained savings in energy poor household represent, let's say, 1% of the total verified savings. So the first answer is that, yes, the contribution of the EO in the alleviation of energy poverty is not so meaningful, was not so meaningful in the first period. And the reason for this is the difficulty of the obligated party to identify and approach energy poor households due to the lack of the national definition as eligible household were the household that were classified, were eligible for social tariff schemes. So the vast majority of these households were customers in one company, electricity company. So this was the first problem, the first barrier, and of course the lack of motivation by the obligated party, because almost all of them, they managed to fulfill their target. So it's, let's say, an issue of to have the right the right balance between supply and demand, let's say somehow. And nevertheless, all the obligated party realized this potential, and the awareness of them for the energy poverty phenomenon obviously was improved. So the issue now is how it is possible to increase the effectiveness of the EO scheme for the period 2022 of 2030. In this period, we will change the architecture of the scheme. We introduced 3 different typologies of measures: horizontal awareness-raising measures, targeted awareness-raising measures, and technical measures. We have specified a separate target for the technical measures. So we want to foster, the involvement of the obligated party to the implementation of technical measures, and we provide different increase factors in the case that these measures will be implemented in energy poor households. For the targeted awareness-raising measures, we have adopted an uplift factor equal to 1.1. For the technical measures, an uplift factor equal to 1.4, equal to the existing one. And in the case that technical measures foresee the implementation also of REST technology, this increase factor is increased to 1.5. And of course, the calculation is performed take into consideration the final energy savings, which will be resulted by these interventions. And some conclusions. We believe that it is feasible to exploit to use EO schemes so as to contribute, so as to alleviate more effectively the phenomenon of energy poverty. Of course, it is important to design very carefully the framework for their involvement, and we believe that, such in the case of Ireland, it is important to design and implement some specific support scheme in order to facilitate the participation of both energy poor households and obligated party into this attempt. Of course, it's important to integrate the EO scheme into the national context for the alleviation of energy poverty, and of course to avoid overlaps with other measures in order to combat this phenomenon. And it's very crucial to identify, to have a clear and transparent procedure in order to identify the energy poor households with specific criteria which can be used by all the obligated parties. And of course, this will become more easier for the obligated party to approach and to implement energy poor households, measures in the energy poor households. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christos. Very enlightening, and also we can see how this EO scheme has worked with the uplift factors. In the meantime, I would like to ask all the audience